podcast. I'm Nick Mercer, and it's just me today. No Erin Glowful today. She's busy doing work for the valuable work, I should say, for the Newfoundland Labrador Brain Injury Association. So I will, before I get started talking to Dr. Francis Skinner, I will first like to thank our sponsor, HeadCheck Health. Concussion Talk podcast is presented by HeadCheck Health. HeadCheck Health bridges the gaps in concussion care through simple, powerful technology. Join organizations like the Canadian Football League, Track Factory Racing, the Canadian Junior Hockey League, Eastern Washington University, and Volleyball Canada, who rely on HeadCheck Health to improve communication and optimize care. Visit headcheckhealth.com for more. Okay, so Dr. Skinner, I read you had a engineering degree, and then you became interested in neuroscience. So could you please is that right, first of all, and then could you just explain your academic background and your interest, how you came to grow interest in neuroscience from engineering?
Okay, so so thank you for the chance to chat today, first of all. And so I'm a computational neuroscientist, as you mentioned, at the Krembil Brain Institute here at the University Health Network. And I started off in applied math and computer science in my first degree, but I actually did not get into neuroscience until my postdoctoral studies when I was in Boston. And sort of, there's a lot of in-between details, but I sort of, for me, it was always about trying to bring mathematics and biology together in terms of what I was interested in. I've always loved math, and I originally wanted to be a vet, actually, because of loving animals. So I was originally planning to become a veterinarian, and I actually had been accepted into University of Guelph, had a scholarship, and everything else was happening. But because I've always loved math, I got coerced, so to speak, because of this new math program at the University of Waterloo. So I ended up there. But as I think I was sort of saying that I ended up in biomedical engineering for graduate studies because I was, I sort of wanted to have this combination of biology and math. And I didn't know how best to kind of do that. So I went that way, but I still didn't feel like I had enough of this sort of interaction. And so in my postdoctoral studies, for reasons of, I got married in the time, my husband is in astronomy, and we were trying to find life together. So I ended up in Boston, and the lab that I ended up being was a neuroscience lab. So even though I came in there initially not doing neuroscience, because of trying to seek this combination of biology and math, I was very, very fortunate with the group I ended up there. And that's kind of how I got into sort of neuroscience and computational neuroscience, which was sort of, in those days, not sort of a clear, a recognizable word, let's put it that way, as a field. But it really sort of got me very excited because I felt here I could kind of take advantage of my love of math and mathematical modeling and be involved in biological systems in this case, it happened to be neuroscience, but it was actually crabs and lobsters, neural networks and crabs and lobsters at that time. But it was really about trying to understand how these networks, produce their output using mathematical models as a tool. So
so that's
short story.
So I guess if you did there describe generally what is computational neuroscience. When I saw that in your profile, I became excited. I thought that's interesting to hear that for, even though it's a fairly big field, and I'd never heard of computational neuroscience. So could you please just define that, and while you're at that, just to just define that first. So if you define the computational neuroscience.
Yeah, sure. Actually, that's a fantastic question to ask at this stage because depending on who you talk to, you might get slightly different answers. But I think the way I would sort of describe it is, so first of all, it's a very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary field. So, of course, mathematics, physics, engineering, biology, physiology, psychology, and all these fields. So it's very interdisciplinary. But what is sort of different about it is we're all neuroscientists, but we're using sort of mathematical, theoretical tools to help us sort of understand the most complex organ in our bodies, which is the brain. So I would distinguish it from, say, artificial intelligence or machine learning, because those, of course, are other fields, but computational neuroscience may use tools of machine learning, all the rest of it, but
Okay.
the emphasis is on trying to understand the biological system. So this interaction with experimental work, and the biological system in this case is the brain, and so therefore myself and many other people in the field, it's about neurological disease, because it's such a complex organ to understand, and we really, trying to bring mathematical theoretical tools to help in that endeavor. I guess that's what I would describe the field.
That's a pretty heady description there. So actually, well, I just want to know you're interested in the hippocampus. So this will, I guess, kind of show your biology, your brain, your neuroscience chops. Could you explain why you think the hippocampus is so important, and what it does, basically what it does, where it is, how it relates to the other parts of the brain and their function?
Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a really nice time to answer this question, actually. Thank you. Because the hippocampus is a brain hub. So, of course, it's about the whole brain, but, more and more studies, like whether it's from sort of imaging, connectomic, theoretical studies, is really sort of pointing to the hippocampus, which is sort of deep inside, inside your brain. It's sort of a banana-shaped object, part of the medial temporal lobe, the seat of often where seizures start, Alzheimer's, like that sort of seems to be changes happening there. But a lot of studies point at it being a hub. So it's important, we know from many studies that's important in memory and learning, and it's been studied experimentally by many labs because of the accessibility of the experimental preparation of a slice. So many, many different reasons. But the hippocampus is an essential brain structure with learning and memory. And what we're finding is that it's connected to, well, every part of the brain is connected, but it seems to be a key hub. So, if we think about airports and, going on, it's sort of like New York or Chicago, it would seem that things have to flow through there. It's an information core in the brain. Exactly how and what it's done is, we don't know, but it's just studies are pointing to that being sort of a hub in terms of the brain functioning in general. Yeah, that's sort of the short version, I would say, of to answer your question. Hopefully it's, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Great. I know. And so how does that relate to, say, so how would the hippocampus? You're studying the hippocampus in relation to brain disease, and also obviously you said like it serves a double role in memory creation. But how does that relate to, say, brain diseases like Alzheimer's or maybe a brain injury?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So okay. So I'm the computational neuroscience person. So not the experimental expert, but because of our models being tightly integrated with experimental work, there's a lot of data, that sort of experimental data that points to the hippocampus as sort of where the pathological state sort of starts in terms of, say, Alzheimer's disease, where seizures might start. And so the hippocampus, because it's heavily studied, there's a lot of pieces of information. I see it as a puzzle. So from a mathematical model perspective, we can sort of try to sort of put those pieces together as in a puzzle and sort of figure out how this emerges. Like, we might know certain cell types might be more susceptible in dying, or the connection changes, but it's this big mess of complexity. So the modeling, the way I see it, is sort of to try to untangle and decipher these changes. So in brain disease, one of the sort of, I think, pretty clear hallmarks now is oscillatory activity. So this is where our modeling and many other labs modeling is focused, is how do sort of the electrical activities that are recorded change in disease. And so the electrical activity is something that we can record, whether it's sort of right inside the brain or on the brain surface. And these rhythms of different frequencies are been known since the 1920s. How they're generated, there's different ideas, and this is where our models I think, are contributing some understanding. But what a lot of experimental studies have shown is you have these oscillatory activities, say a theta rhythm, which is the most robust one in the hippocampus, which is about 3 to 12 hertz. It interacts with another high frequency oscillation at about 40 hertz. And in a normal state, it has a certain pattern. And in an Alzheimer's state or epileptic state or, any sort of brain disorder, pathological state, it changes in very specific ways. So it's kind of, maybe you can think of it, people talk about it as a biomarker of sort of seeing when, disease starts and sort of trying to sort of diagnose it. So that this is, one of the ways that we think about it. And then, of course, try to put it back to its, correct normal state if we understand it, how to do that.
Right. Again, that makes sense. Kind of like they're trying to do and get more immediate definition of definitely when a concussion occurs, and I know there's blood biomarkers is one thing they've tried, and I don't know how reliable they are yet, but the oscillation isn't. I don't know how quickly we did to test oscillations in the hippocampus, but that sort of thing would be it's a good way to maybe it's not necessarily good, but an interesting way to find out where the when say a concussion or any brain injuries occurred. Not necessarily the hippocampus, but in wherever.
Exactly. Yeah, you got it. I mean that's the thing. It's it's the tools we have, and more sophisticated tools are being developed.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Great. And I just want to. With my co-host there, Erin Gilbo, she did a graduate diploma at Mohawk College about brain disorders. So she would have some definite more brain disorder questions here, because I'm not as aware of specific brain disorders that may be of interest. But what asked about the brain in general, because I just put Lawrence up with my. Another one of the not co, but my former host of not former current host of Phoenix Concussion podcast is on my podcast. Lawrence actually did a course about the brain and concussions and stuff, so I talked about the brain very briefly. They mentioned the lobes and the temporal lobe, frontal lobe, and the occipital lobe, and the brain stem, and the corpus callosum and stuff, and so, but I want to mention that, I wanted to ask you about because I think what I'm hearing from you is that computational neuroscience is about kind of showcasing how the brain is so complex, yet still integrated, and I guess mathematical modeling is a good way to kind of demonstrate that, or a good way to theorize about that and showcase how maybe you can theorize how integrated one part of the brain may affect another part of the brain. Is that what you'd? I know you don't deal in brain injury necessarily, but is that the type of thing that computational neuroscience can do?
Yes, that and more, I would say. So the computational neuroscience, sort of the mathematical model, the theoretical insights, people who are in the field, come at it from many different angles, and it's been sort of described as a patchwork quilt, which I really like, because we don't know exactly what specifics and models are really going to sort of, make sense once we sort of look at the experimental situation and be able to test things out. So we kind of have to try all many different things. So what is really important is sort of the goal of the particular model of what it's trying to do. So just to be specific a little bit, for us, I'm very interested in sort of how the different cells, so we have, billions of cells in our brain, about as, almost as many as we have stars in the galaxy, in the Milky Way. Oops, sorry. You're muted.
Oh yes, no, sorry. I was saying am I still muted? No,
yeah.
Okay, no.
Not now.
I'm saying you must say that to your husband and you must compare that a lot. The stars in the universe and the neurons in the brain.
Yes. Yeah. When we have two kids. Yeah, when our kids were still in primary school, I went in to talk to the class once, and talking about a little hippocampus. I had a little baby rat hippocampus to show the kids, and made the point. And my husband has gone in to talk about astronomy, and just the fact that there's as many stars in actually there's about 100 billion, I guess, stars in the Milky Way, and there's about 19 billion in our brain. So even though we're working on very different scales,
Yeah.
there's a link.
Exactly. Yeah.
So basically, all I was trying to say is that there's many different types of computational neuroscience areas, and people tackle it in different ways. So they might build a model that is very specific to the specific cell types in the brain. That's sort of the type that we do, and focus in the hippocampus, as you said. And there's other people who may very very simplified models, but the kind of experimental they touch is at a sort of more generic level, or just looking at propagation of activity. So they come up with theoretical ideas that then we can sort of apply to sort of understand. So the Platform Quilt idea, which was coined, I guess I would put it, by Larry Abbott, a very cool guy in the field, a very knowledgeable guy in theoretical neuroscience. He's at Columbia. Said that term, and I said that's it exactly, because we're all coming in at different ways, but we got to attach. We have to link, right? If we're going to we're all touching the experimental data in different ways and different questions and different details, but they kind of have to all be connected in a quilt to bring about our understanding, because we don't know exactly what is going to work in terms of being the best help to help us understand, the brain and neurological disease, I guess is how I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good, because you're talking about the quilt, which is exactly what's on your. I'm looking now at the research lab, the SkinnerLab.org/research, and it had, I don't know how old that is, but your convergence, convergence translation, and and explain that, and there's a good diagram here of what you do in the computational neuroscience, your hypothesis developments, and then how it links to other aspects of research, and also the brain is, as you all know, the brain is just so complex that it's kind of fits in well. I would think there's a good way to meet the two of the brain tree and computational neurosciences, and because you have to collaborate and do it, because brain tree is so unique, it happens to every different part of the brain, and how computational neuroscience can really hypothesize about how interactions in one region of the brain will affect another part of the brain, and another part of experiment. Well, not really the brain necessarily, but of experimental and other sorts of treatments. So other parts of people who specialize in different parts of the brain will get a good idea that aspects of their area will affect another area.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was the question more of a.
Those are very big questions, but I mean, I guess maybe I will sort of address what you said in the beginning, which is about this convergence and translation. So that is and also collaboration and cycling is sort of the key things, because it always has to be an ongoing cycle between the mathematical modeling, the theoretical insight, and experimental data, because if not, then it's sort of like, okay, well, we might have an interesting theory, but if we can't kind of take it back to experimental work and see how it might change, in a normal state, in a pathological state, then it's kind of stuck, right? So it has to be a cycle, and by necessity collaboration, because as I mentioned, all the different fields that are involved. And actually at this point, maybe what I'll bring out is something I feel extremely strongly about, which is the human nature aspect of this.
Yes.
Because, as you said, it affects everybody. That's one. But when doing the research, you have all these different fields, and someone who's a physicist versus someone who's a biologist has a different perspective. Yeah. You have to have this sort of mutual respect when we talk to each other to be able to interact and collaborate. And so that whole human nature comes in at that level also. So I love the field, of course, but it is about the individual researcher, the individual patient, the individual experiment. It's always about individual people, and you might have giant collaborations, but it's a bunch of individual people who have to have this sort of open-minded, mutual respectful attitude, and try to kind of work together to move forward. So that's sort of just a general comment. So what collaboration and cycling, that point. So I feel very strongly about that, and I sort of have a little bit of a philosophical aspect in the graduate course we have about the human interaction, because we have to leave our biases at the door when we sort of try to collaborate and talk to each other, because otherwise, we can't move forward. So that's one. The convergence and translation part, the way I see that, and what I intended in that is that experiments and thus models that are built on experimental data typically would be in, rodents and mammals, crabs, not non-humans, because obviously you can't do these kind of experiments at cellular levels. So the convergence and translation idea is to try to develop our understanding of cellular networks in the brain, to derive sort of principles of how the patterns, so in this case oscillations, would arise. And if you have that understanding of what those balances are, you can translate it to a human situation. Because of course we're not going to have that kind of experimental data. We'll have maybe pieces because of neurosurgeons doing, so some of my collaborators, have some human data, but it's going to be like, so again, I made the analogy of a puzzle because this is how I see the mathematical modeling. So you have even less pieces in the puzzle. So if you can translate your understanding from a more complete puzzle based on rodent data, or even like more invertebrate studies, which you can get down to fundamental mechanistic understandings like homeostatic processes, you can translate that to the brain and suggest, targets or experiments, or how to analyze the data that you're getting. So that's what I think about translation. So you converge on an understanding from the experimental data you can excite, and then hopefully translate those principles or mechanisms to the human situation. That's what I mean by that in my personal research overview. I could give you more specific details, but I'll maybe pause there.
Okay, great. Well, actually, I was going to ask you more about just Canberra and Krembil, I gotta pronounce that correctly, and UHN. But first, you mentioned invertebrates, and you can get information from them too. But have you ever experimented with the octopus? I know they have two brains apparently, so I don't know how that would affect your. So that would be interesting. Yes, have you seen that the Netflix movie documentary show whatever on the octopus on this basically deep sea diver? I'm not sure, forget if he was a scientist or not, but watching octopus lived in his environment in Australia, and it was just fascinating. They're amazing. They're great, amazing creatures. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they seem extremely brilliant. Yeah, I may not have seen that particular one, but I have definitely seen a lot of those. They're fascinating creatures.
Yeah. Yes. And it sounds like we could just talk forever about there's the brain and this. Even though I'm not a computational neuroscientist, but it's a very extremely interesting field. I just want to ask you finally about how the Krembil in your research. How is it Krembil? That's correctly.
Yeah, Krembil.
So that integrates into the whole UHN. University Health Network in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, how that integrates into that whole system. So how does your research integrate into, I know the Toronto Rehab Institute is there, and a few other hospitals, research hospitals in the University of Toronto maybe?
Yeah. So in a nutshell, I mean, it's a fantastic environment and it encompasses many aspects. So University Health Network, has, Krembil Brain Institute as part of it, Toronto General, Princess Margaret, Rehab, and all the rest of it. But so we, meaning myself, one of the scientists who are at the Krembil Research Institute, the Krembil Brain Institute, are at the Toronto Western node, because that's where the neuroscience focus is. Okay. Yeah. And so Don, who's our director, it's sort of integrated in the sense that, we're all sort of, focused on brain disease. There's also vision and arthritis, but yeah, I mean, you have this sort of very tight link to the hospital, which for me personally is very motivating with the models and talking directly and working with neurosurgeons and neurologists and all the rest of it. So when you're building and designing your models and trying to figure out what makes the most sense, it could have a practical aspect down the road, because these problems aren't going to be solved overnight. So if you kind of have the opportunity to sort of talk at early stages, that makes a huge difference in my mind, because if we're in our silos, it's hard to sort of figure out what is the best way to integrate. And that's why, I mean, it's a very novel situation to have the computational neuroscience as part of the research institute. And, it's our director and other people in the field that sort of see the importance of these sort of mathematical theoretical approaches, which we need together, integrated with all the sort of experimental, clinical, basic translational research that's going on to move forward in this. I guess I go back to the patchwork quilt. If the pieces all over the place, you can't make the quilt.
Exactly. I know. So actually, I guess finally, just your final thoughts on just how it relates to concussion or brain injury. But also, have you had anybody from, say, drug rehab or in their neurological institutes ask you to prepare a certain hypothesis about use your mathematical models for a certain purpose in brain injury or concussion research?
Yep. So right now, I mean, we have an ongoing. We just got funded, which was wonderful, to really sort of bring a lot of these ideas together. So we've been doing modeling and stuff for many years in the Hippocampus, from a cellular-based perspective, and collaborate with experimentalists at the Krembil and other places. And a fellow neurologist, an electrophysiologist, engineer, and myself have now got together, and basically we're going to bring the experiments that deal with concussion, so this would be in rodents, to see how those oscillations that I mentioned in the hippocampus change. And now we actually have a mathematical model that's developed enough from a cellular perspective that we can sort of analyze the experiment and the model side by side, so that we can sort of develop the appropriate kind of analysis tools to sort of link them. And then we could sort of use the model to make predictions about cellular-based pathways that are, say, most affected in like a traumatic brain injury type state. So it's really sort of been in that environment and years of discussing and talking. Yeah, I mean, there's some other things going on, but that's sort of that's very excited about it, because it's going to bring engineering tools that have to analyze the data carefully, the mathematical model itself, which has sort of been developed, and the experimental data in vivo and in vitro capacity to analyze and bring together. So I'm very excited about that, because if that sort of quote unquote holds water, then it can be sort of used as a strategy, if you like, across many different brain diseases. So like a cognitive readout platform. So I'm very excited about that, and I could talk forever, but I'll stop.
No, that is very, and it's also very encouraging to hear how seriously and thoroughly everyone in UHA and Krembil, but also anyone else. I'm sure you're not alone, because you value collaboration with other institutes, but also how thoroughly it's being studied. Concussion and brain injury and other brain disease are being studied, and it's very, very encouraging to hear. So thank you so much. And do you have is there a good place for people to find you online, or do you post anything online, or you just
I mean, we're part of the Krembil Brain Institute, and the kcnhub.com, where I think I sent you that link.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, so I mean, that website has all kinds of information and links. We're linked in many different ways, but yeah, I guess I would say, first of all, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity.
Thank you.
And I think we just have to keep talking to each other more at all different levels, and be open-minded, and listen to the details and the specifics, and together we could move forward. But it is about the details and the specifics and working together.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you everyone for listening. And this is I'll have all the links to Dr. Skinner's. There she is. Hello, she's video first time, but I have all the links to the KCN and Skinner Lab, if that's okay to use.
Yep.
Okay, and all those links in the description. But thanks again to Dr. Skinner, and thank you for everyone for listening.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Music at the beginning of this podcast is by Ben Sound. www.bensound.com.